Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to begin this morning with a trauma warning. This is going to be a hard sermon. And we're going to talk about violence and killing and things like that. So really, if you've had enough of that in your week already, enough talk about trauma and violence and killing, feel free just to go back and have a cup of coffee and do something else. Or take a walk. It's a beautiful day outside.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, well, sorry about that. Actually, I'm not sure you count. Let's see how this goes. Yeah, so I also know that many people much wiser than me have spoken about the Orlando events. And so I'm going to add my little voice to it, recognizing how inadequate it all is, and how much, in some ways, I feel just as much part of the problem as part of the solution. But we want to begin this morning with the prophet Elijah. And one of the problems for me in speaking to people that I don't know very well yet is I don't know what you know yet, or know already. So tell me something you know about the prophet Elijah. Anything. What do you know about the prophet Elijah? The chariot. Okay, we've got a chariot story coming up. Anything else? Okay, well, that tells me where we're starting. Okay, that's good to know. That's fine. Right? It wasn't like you get extra points for knowing a lot or anything like that.
Well, you set a place at the table for Elijah and Passover. Set a place at the table. Passover, yeah.
Okay,
His prayer shut up the heavens for several years.
His prayer shut up the heavens for several years.
His nemesis was Jezebel.
His nemesis Jezebel, yes.
A companion named Elisha.
He gets a companion named Elisha. Okay, good. So we'll start there. Right? But we really need to start with King Ahab. Right? Because Ahab is king at this point in the nation of Israel. And by many standards, Ahab is the greatest king in the history of Israel. That if you believe Bill Clinton when he said, "It's the economy, stupid," then Ahab was probably the greatest king in the history of Israel. That Ahab was king during a time when Israel was prosperous, when Israel was both economically and militarily strong. That this is probably in many ways Israel at the height of its power, of its authority, of its economics. Right? So if those are your this is the way you decide what good and bad is, then Ahab was undoubtedly the best king in the history of Israel. But Elijah doesn't care. What Elijah cares about is whether God is being worshipped. And likely this had a lot to do with the fact that, just like in our world, in Ahab's world, the fact that the economy was doing really well really only meant that the rich were doing really, really well. And the poor were probably doing worse all of the time. Right? And, if you're one of the rich, you go, "Oh, look, economic growth." So that was sort of Ahab's world too, a lot like ours. But like I said, Elijah doesn't care. Elijah has other interests. So God sent him to tell Ahab, there's going to be a famine. There's going to be a drought. And the reason that there's a drought is because what people are starting to do is they're starting to worship this other god, who we call Baal or Baal or however you want to pronounce that. And Baal was the god of thunder and lightning and rain. So for God to call a drought is sort of challenging Baal right on his home turf. This is what Baal is supposed to be best at. And God says, fine, if that's what you're best at, let's see how best you are at this. And God calls a drought, and there's a drought. And after the drought is over, Elijah sets up this big contest up on Mount Carmel. So they go up on this big mountain, and all the prophets of Baal gather on one side, and they set up their altar, and Elijah alone, he sets up his altar on the other side. And there's only one rule to this contest. No matches. Right? So God, each God is supposed to send fire down from heaven to light the fire. Then we can do our... And again, this is what Baal is supposed to be best at. Lightning and rain and thunder, right? So, no problem for Baal, right? We'll see if the actual, if Israel's God can do this too. Well, of course, the 450 prophets of Baal, they, do their whole prophet thing, whatever that amounts to, and nothing. Right? So then Elijah says, well, let's make this contest at least interesting. So he has them pour all of this water over top of the altar, right? And then he just sort of says, well, God, there it is. And God sends fire which consumes not just the wood on the altar, but the altar itself and all of the water. And the people respond by saying, the Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God. One of these great high points in Israel's history. And then Elijah takes the 450 prophets of Baal and he slaughters them. He kills them all with a sword. Elijah is a mass murderer by almost any standard. What do we do with this? And more importantly, what does God do with this? What does God do with a prophet who, without instructions, without any orders from God, decides to slaughter 450 people, human beings, with a sword? So what does God do? Well, God says, Elijah, you need to get out of there, first of all. Run. So Elijah runs. Right? And then after he runs, he walks. And he walks a long, long way down south to the mountain of Horeb or Sinai or whatever we want to call this mountain. Right? 40 days and 40 nights. Which in theory should give him a lot of time to think about what he's just done. Elijah, you idiot. You just killed 450 people with a sword. And then God comes to him and says, Elijah, what are you doing here? Which is, I think, just another way of saying, Elijah, what have you done? And how does Elijah respond? He says, I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant and thrown down all your altars and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away. Elijah whines. He's just killed 450 people, and he's whining about the fact that they want to kill him too. Well, what did he expect? He just killed 450 friends of the queen, and now he's upset that she wants to kill him too. And I think God is feeling about the same way. So God says, look, go to the mouth of the cave and stand there. I'm going to come to you more obviously. So there's this big, earthquake, and there's this big wind, and there's this big fire. God is not in those things, which is where you sort of expect God to be. And then God comes, and here the translation gets impossible, and so we have different translations. So many of you probably grew up with the phrase, still small voice. This is where still small voice comes from. That's the King James. Right? What was the translation we heard this morning? We had the NIV.
It was a whisper.
A whisper. Right? My translation says sound of sheer silence. Right? So we have to start thinking about the prophets Simon and Garfunkel as well, I suppose. Right? We have this something that's beyond words. Because I think that's where God is at this point. Like, what do you say to someone who has just killed 450 people in your name? God saying to Omar Mateen right now? I'm guessing it's an awful lot like the sound of sheer silence. Just like, what? And Elijah, he still doesn't catch on. And so when God says, look, Elijah, what are you doing here? He repeats himself word for word. Exactly. Elijah has learned nothing. Elijah has just met God, and he learned nothing. Right. So then God sends him off with some tasks. What do you do with somebody who's just not going to learn anything? Well, you give them concrete tasks to do. And the slaughter doesn't stop there. So what do we learn from this? What can we possibly take away from this story? I think there's three things quickly. The first is that this whole big come back to God thing just doesn't work. Right? There are people in this country, in this town, who'd like to, rent the big stadium in town and have a big revival and do the whole come back to God thing. Elijah did this big time. Way bigger than anything we can imagine. Didn't need a rock band, had fire coming from heaven. Right? Didn't help at all. Right? When he's in trouble, he can't even run back to his own people. He's got to run into the wilderness. Didn't help at all. So that's the first thing. The second thing we learn is that killing 450 prophets of Baal doesn't help at all either. We as a church, we as a nation, we as people have to learn this lesson over and over and over again, apparently. We can kill all of the bad guys we want to. Doesn't really work. It just doesn't. So we're going to try it again, right? This week again, a bunch of diplomats from the Middle East sent an email to President Obama saying, boy, we really ought to start bombing more in Syria. That would be a great idea. That's always worked in the past. We have learned nothing, apparently. Right? And as one of the most frightening things is you listen to all the quote-unquote Christian responses to Orlando, and it's like, oh, let's kill some more people. That'll always work. Don't take away our guns. Jesus loves guns. The church is no smarter than the rest of us. It's sad. So that's the third lesson. The second lesson. One of the problems in preaching without notes. What is the third lesson? Sure, it was a good one. But I think let's just go forward to Jesus. Right? Because right, Jesus had a similar sort of situation. Right? He was dealing with people who were wandering away from God. He was dealing with a time that economically Israelites were doing pretty well, at least the rich were. Right? He was dealing with lots and lots of priests and Pharisees who thought they understood God, and there were thousands of people in Jesus' day who were ready to kill other people in the name of God, just like there are today. So Jesus had the same sort of stuff going on. And Jesus heads off to Gerasa, which is Gentile territory, to talk to some Gentiles about all of this kingdom of God stuff. But instead of going to talk to the chief of the village, the leaders, the head honchos, the big guys, right, or have a big public event, he goes and talks to the one demon-possessed man. And this man asks him, interestingly enough, almost the same question that God asked Elijah. So in some version of "What are you doing here, Jesus of Nazareth, Son of the Most High God? Have you come to torment me?" Because that's what God's, right? God usually sends people to torment people too often. And Jesus does not respond with fire from heaven. He does not respond by tormenting the demon or the man possessed. He responds by reaching out and healing. So insofar as there is any answer after this week, these are some of those. Right? When you have a chance, right, weep with those who weep. There's a lot to be said for just weeping. Because sometimes that's all that's left of us. But also stand beside those who fear. There are still people, many, many, many people in Morgantown who are afraid to go to church because they do not think a church has safe spaces. Stand beside them. Say, yeah, sometimes it's not. Some of you, right, may not even want us to know who you really are inside. Because the church is a scary place. I'm sorry. We will try. And finally, say something. Right? When you hear hate speech, when you hear discrimination, when you hear categories of people being called less than human, say something. Stand with people. Because you don't know who's beside you. You don't know who's next. You don't know who is being hurt by your silence. So those are my very small words for this morning. And I look forward to this conversation continuing at the picnic and over the next few weeks. I look forward to your contributions to this. Because, yeah, slaughtering 450 people is not going to get us anywhere. Amen.